Ladies and gentlemen of the class of 1997, wear sunscreen. Anyone remember that speech or hypothetical speech I just learned? So that started out as an essay written in the Chicago Tribune in 97. It was a hypothetical commencement speech that started out wear sunscreen. He also talked about do one thing every day that scares you, right along the lines of doing hard things sober, which everybody needs to do, not just those with a little disorder. And he also said worrying is futile. And he said it was like chewing gum, or it'd be like chewing gum to solve an algebra problem, which goes in line with the mantra, the sobriety mantra of who cares? Anyway, I bring this up to say that I have realized recently, I think I have a commencement speech in me. And I partially realized that at my nephew's high school graduation party. He was sitting with about 5 or 6 of his buddies. And I went over there and I basically told them or warned them on the dangers not only of drinking, which I said, hey, I know you're going to do it, but here's my story. Be careful, etc. But then I said, but the thing you should never, ever even try, although you sadly probably already have, is gamble. Gambling got legalized in Massachusetts a couple years ago, 23, and very easy to access, online accounts. You allegedly can only use a debit card, meaning you can't put it on a credit card, at least in Massachusetts, which is good. But, as soon as that came out, I said on a video or a post, I just said, hey, be careful. I once lost a ton of money gambling, which I'll talk about. I said, people's lives are going to be destroyed. So if there's a loved one in your life, especially a child of gambling age or higher, keep an eye out for them. Or a spouse, partner. Keep an eye on your bank account statements or their statements. If you have separate accounts, you're still going to keep an eye. It's just like gambling for those who have the true disorder. Again, there's a difference. That only I explain. There's an addiction, which is really just an ingrained habit that you can beat with willpower, and there's an addiction disorder, which is a chronic brain disease. And just like those of us with the alcohol disorder, those with the gambling disorder get such a high off of that dopamine. The more dopamine you get and the faster you get it, the more addictive the substance or thing is. That's why cocaine's number one, alcohol's right up there, and gambling's got to be right up there. It's crazy. So, I told these kids, never even start. You can never win. Nobody wins. The odds are less than 50%, slightly less. Craps might even be right around exactly 50 or somewhere close to that. I think the best odds. But you're never going to win. And the best example of that is I had a buddy who was gambling himself, and his buddies would ask him to bet money for him. So he'd have to, if they owed, he'd have to pay for, they'd give him the money. He'd pay the bookie, or he'd have to collect for them. Guess what he did? He became the bookie because he knew his friends and himself was always losing. So he became the bookie. Let me tell you, the bookie didn't like that. Guess why? Because the bookie was making a lot of money, because nobody wins ever, at least in the long term. Maybe a fraction of 1%, some kind of savant. Although unless you have inside information, it still all comes down to luck. It's crazy. So my story actually does go back to 97, where I had finished paying off my college loans. This is pre-internet days. And my brother's buddies were gamblers. And once I paid off my loans, I'd say to them, oh, can you give me $25 on the Celtics, $25 on the Bruins? And they would do it. But then if I owed, they'd have to track me down to give them the money, or they'd have to find me to give me my envelope, which is what you got with your cash. You got a number. You called a bookie. In this case, it was a guy at a restaurant/bar in the back of the bar taking phone calls, and you call and your number would be like B12. So he'd answer and you'd go B12. And you could say, okay. And then you'd ask for the spreads of the games, and he'd give them to you, and then you'd think about it, and then you would call him back. You could get the spreads from the newspaper, but they wouldn't be live. So you'd have to get the live ones. And then the worst would be by the time you call them back, maybe the spread had changed by, God forbid, a half a point or a point or maybe more than a point. Oh my God. The number of times that probably mattered is so small. But anyway, his jerk buddies, and yes, I'll call them jerks. Maybe they didn't know any better, but they basically got me my own line. Instead of just telling me, don't gamble, they got me my own line with the bookie. And I proceeded over the next, I want to say year, maybe 2 years. I think maybe a year. I ended up losing $10,000. And very luckily, the last time I ever gambled, I thought the bookie owed me money, a couple $100, because that's all you ever won. Meanwhile, you always owed triple that, if not more. And I thought he owed me money. He told me that I owed him money. And I said, absolutely not. And claimed, of course, didn't get my last few bets, which were the winners, as you always had to do, place those Hail Mary bets to cover those losses. And I very luckily, so I quit cold turkey because I was so mad at the bookie for screwing me, but I also finally realized I wasn't addicted in terms of the dopamine hit. I was addicted to winning my money back. And I finally realized it was never going to happen. You know, the only thing I might have been addicted to in those days, you had to get your live scores from the scroll at the bottom of, say, ESPN, and it would be always so annoying when the game you wanted was about to come up, and then they'd go to commercial. It wasn't until years later they started scrolling the scores through the commercials. But, oh my God, can you even imagine? I can't imagine anyone that might be listening to this that gambled pre-internet, and when you had to go through a bookie. Some still might, for all I know. And some, in fact, mass, I guess people still might have till a couple years ago. And again, some still might for whatever reasons, including you can do it on credit. So I tell people, do not ever gamble. You can never win. One of his buddies, who allegedly was winning, so a couple guys did admit it, of his buddies, they said they were never going to do it again. And one guy who was allegedly had always won money said he had stopped as well. And I thought, yeah, you stopped for a reason. So that's the other thing. Guys who say they win usually are just as big of losers in more ways than one. So don't ever do it. It is a complete waste of money. Now, a casino, I will say, if you go to a casino with a set amount of money, which takes discipline, but say $200-$300, and if you can play for a couple hours, which you can do in craps, you can play craps for a long time without losing a lot of money, maybe even win money. I took out a little pamphlet in the library once before a trip to Vegas, and I learned how to play, and I played great. And I've been the hot roller, which is super fun. People at table are tipping me and all that. Now I'm encouraging gambling. But that's the only time I might quote encourage it. And it was worth a couple $100 that probably I eventually lost on some occasions. But that's it. Blackjack, no. You can win very quickly in blackjack, but you can lose even quicker. Stay tuned for a part 2 where I'm going to tell some more horrific stories, including one of my own. And remember, never gamble or quit while you're behind. And wear sunscreen. Thanks.